This story is titled, I accidentally saw my girlfriend's group chat where she said she'd dumped me after getting family jewelry at our wedding and going on an expensive honeymoon. So I pretended I knew nothing until she returned to find her stuff outside with a note telling her off. Hey Reddit, my name is Marcus and I'm 29 years old. This is the story of how I discovered my fiancé was plotting to financially destroy me just weeks before our wedding, and how I managed to turn the situation completely around. Looking back now, I realize that sometimes the worst moments in your life can actually become the catalyst for something much better. It all started a couple of weeks before what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I came home early one Tuesday evening and overheard my fiancée Victoria on a phone call that would change everything. She was laughing with someone about how she was going to clean me out financially and disappear with her boyfriend after our wedding. What she didn't know was that I had already suspected something was wrong, and I was about 3 steps ahead of her entire plan. Let me back up and tell you how we met. I first encountered Victoria 4 years ago at a local business networking event. At the time, I was 25 years old and running my own food truck that I had opened after years of careful saving and meticulous planning. It wasn't anything fancy or glamorous, just good, honest food served at reasonable prices with a loyal customer base that kept coming back. The truck was clearing decent money after all expenses were covered. It wasn't making me rich by any means, but it kept me comfortable and gave me the independence I had always wanted. Getting to that point hadn't been easy. I had spent 3 grueling years working 80-hour weeks at 2 different restaurants, living in a cramped studio apartment with my college roommate, and saving every single cent I could for my business plan. When I finally managed to secure the SBA loan that would cover the remaining startup costs, I was so committed to making it work that I actually slept in the food truck for the first month. I would shower at the gym across the street each morning before opening. That's the part of entrepreneurship that no one ever posts about on Instagram. The unglamorous sacrifices you make when you're building something from nothing. By the time I met Victoria, I had managed to buy a modest 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood. I had purchased it at a foreclosure auction and spent months fixing it up myself. The previous owners had defaulted on their mortgage after going through a messy divorce, and the place needed serious work. I'm talking about a complete new roof, updated electrical systems, and a full kitchen remodel. I did most of the work myself on days when the food truck wasn't operating, learning everything from YouTube videos and getting advice from a retired contractor who lived down the street. It was exhausting, but incredibly rewarding to see the house transform under my own hands. Victoria worked at one of those upscale boutiques downtown where everything costs about 4 times what it should. She was an assistant manager, but from the way she carried herself, you would have thought she was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. She had long brown hair that was always perfectly styled, nails that were always freshly done, and clothes that were always precisely on trend. Victoria had this practiced way of making you feel like you were the most interesting guy in the room while simultaneously making you want to impress her even more. Looking back, I realized that her sales technique from the boutique carried over seamlessly into her dating life. Victoria would ask questions about my business with what seemed like genuine interest, then casually mention how impressed she was with real entrepreneurs like me. It felt flattering at the time, but I should have recognized the calculated nature of her approach. She had a way of making me feel special while subtly positioning herself as someone who appreciated success and ambition. My sister Diana saw through Victoria's act immediately. The first time they met was at a family dinner, and Diana pulled me aside afterward with a concerned expression. "That woman is faker than my co-workers' LinkedIn profiles," she said bluntly. I brushed off her warning as Diana being overprotective, as she had always been suspicious of the women I dated. But this time, her warning carried an urgency that I chose to ignore completely. "So you're really into this one?" Diana had asked when I mentioned getting serious with Victoria a few weeks later. "Yeah, she's different," I replied confidently. "She's ambitious, well-connected, and knows exactly what she wants out of life." "What she wants is your wallet," Diana muttered under her breath, but I pretended not to hear her comment. In retrospect, the red flags were absolutely everywhere, practically waving in my face. Victoria never once offered to pay for anything, not even when I was clearly stretching my budget to cover an expensive dinner that she had suggested. Our very first date ended up costing me $200 at some pretentious fusion restaurant where the portions would have left a toddler still hungry. The food was beautifully presented, but completely unsatisfying. Yet Victoria seemed right at home in that environment. My buddy Ryan had warned me about the financial imbalance early on in our relationship. "Dude, you're making food truck owner money, And she's living a trust fund lifestyle, he pointed out one evening. Do the math. Something doesn't add up here. But when you're sleeping with someone who looks like she could be featured in a toothpaste commercial, your ability to perform basic mathematical calculations mysteriously disappears. Ryan and I had been tight since college, and he had actually helped me move equipment into the food truck when I first started the business. He worked for nothing but pizza and the promise of future discounts, which showed me what real friendship looked like. Dating Victoria felt like getting a surprise promotion that you never applied for. She knew the hostess at every upscale restaurant in town, could get us into exclusive events that I had never even heard of, and her apartment looked like something straight out of a high-end design catalog. Being with her opened doors to a social world that I had never experienced before. However, her apartment should have been the first major warning sign that I completely missed. An assistant manager at a clothing boutique simply doesn't earn enough to afford a 1,400 square foot downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and custom walk-in closets. When I casually asked how she could afford such an expensive place, she gave a vague answer about family help and quickly changed the subject to something else. I found out much later that her parents were actually paying half of her rent each month. She was 28 years old and still financially dependent on her family, but she had made it seem like my financial stability was some kind of novel character trait that she found incredibly attractive. I love that you've built something real, she would say with what I thought was genuine admiration. Most guys our age are still figuring out what they want to do with their lives, but you actually took the risk and created your own success. The first 2 years of our relationship were genuinely good. We had developed comfortable routines together. We rarely fought, and everything seemed to be working smoothly between us. We moved in together after 18 months of dating, finding a nice downtown apartment that we could afford together. Then, Victoria got promoted to assistant manager at the boutique, and suddenly her entire schedule became packed with staff dinners, industry events, and networking opportunities that seemed to consume all of her free time. When I asked if I could join one of these events sometime, there was always a convenient reason why it wouldn't work out. It's just the girls tonight, she would say. Or, it's more of an internal company thing. Or my personal favorite, you'd be bored to death. It's all fashion industry talk that wouldn't interest you. At the time, I wasn't particularly concerned about these exclusions because we had been solid as a couple for years, and I trusted her completely. 4 months after her promotion, I decided it was time to take the next step. I bought an engagement ring that was just over 2 carats and cost me $21,000. My cousin worked in the jewelry business and got me a deal, but it still completely wiped out my personal savings and maxed out one of my credit cards. Victoria had casually mentioned her college roommate's engagement ring during a conversation months earlier, commenting on how she had always thought that particular size and quality was the minimum for what she would consider a respectable proposal. I proposed on our 3-year anniversary at the same restaurant where we had our very first date. I got down on one knee, said all the romantic things I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks, and asked her to marry me. She cried, said yes enthusiastically, and then immediately took 4 different angle shots of the ring on her finger. She posted all of them on Instagram before we had even ordered our appetizers for the evening. The caption read, "Dreams do come true. He did good." The comment section absolutely exploded with fire emojis and OMG goals responses from women I had never met in my life. I remember sitting there watching her interact with her phone instead of celebrating with me, and thinking to myself, this is what all the hard work was for. This is why I sacrificed so much to build my business and buy a house. What an absolute chump I was. Fast forward about a year into our engagement, and wedding planning had consumed every single waking moment of our lives. We spent weekends visiting potential venues, attending catering tastings, and having heated arguments about whether we should go with letterpress or digital invitations. Victoria's parents had contributed $12,000 to the wedding budget, but somehow the total cost had ballooned to $55,000. The difference between what her parents contributed and the actual cost came entirely from my savings, my food truck profits, and a home equity loan that I had taken out against my house but kept quiet about. That $12,000 from her parents came with more strings attached than a marionette puppet. Her mother had to approve every single decision, from the flower arrangements to the table settings to the menu selections. For people who were contributing less than 25% of the total wedding cost, they certainly acted like they were majority shareholders in our special day. The wedding date was set for June 15th, which was now only 9 weeks away. Our honeymoon in Cancun was already booked and completely paid for. Meanwhile, I had been secretly house hunting because I wanted to surprise Victoria with something special. I found a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Westbrook Gardens, which was a solid neighborhood with a reasonable location for potentially expanding my food truck concept into something bigger. The house needed some cosmetic updates, but it had incredible potential and good bones. The property had been sitting on the market for 105 days because it needed work, which meant I could negotiate the price down significantly. The closing was scheduled for 2 weeks before our wedding, and I was planning to surprise Victoria with the keys during our reception. I had to get my dad to co-sign on the mortgage since my credit score had taken a hit from all the wedding expenses we had been accumulating. The house was 3,200 square feet with a big backyard, and the previous owner had started some updates but ran out of money halfway through the project. I figured I could finish the renovations over time, just like I had done with my first house. It would be a labor of love that we could work on together as newlyweds. Work had been absolutely brutal during this period. Summer season was ramping up for the food truck business, and I had been putting in 65-hour weeks trying to keep everything staffed and running smoothly. 2 of my workers had quit with no notice whatsoever, leaving me scrambling to cover their shifts. My head cook was threatening to leave for a corporate restaurant job that offered health benefits and paid time-off benefits that I simply couldn't match as a small business owner. Victoria was swamped with work too, or at least that's what she told me. The boutique was apparently preparing for their seasonal changeover, which according to her required lots of late nights and weekend inventory sessions. When I pointed out that most retail inventory typically happens during closed business hours, she became defensive about my questioning. "Our process is completely different," she snapped. "We're not some big box store that can just shut down and count products. We have to maintain our customer service standards while managing inventory." That Tuesday evening, I decided to come home early from work. We had barely seen each other all week due to our conflicting schedules, so I thought I would surprise her with takeout from that Thai restaurant she's always talking about. I had picked up pad thai, spring rolls, and those mango sticky rice desserts that she absolutely loves. As I put my key in the lock of our apartment door, I heard Victoria's voice coming from the balcony. She was on the phone, laughing in that particular way she does when she's talking to someone she considers important, higher pitched than normal, with a calculated breathiness that I had noticed but never really thought about before. I set the bags of food down quietly on the kitchen counter and moved toward the sound of her voice, planning to surprise her when she finished her call. "The ring is gorgeous. You should see it in person," she was saying to whoever was on the other end of the line. "It almost makes up for having to screw him for the past 3 years." I froze completely, my keys still in my hand, not believing what I had just heard. "God, the wedding planning is absolutely exhausting," she continued. "His family wants a church ceremony, can you imagine? It's so basic and traditional, but I've got to play nice and go along with it until we're actually married." My throat tightened as I realized what I was hearing, but I couldn't move or make any noise. "Divorce is where the real money is, though," Victoria said with another laugh. "That's when I can really cash in on all this effort I've been putting in." I should have made some noise right then. Let her know that I was home and could hear everything she was saying. Instead, I stood perfectly still against the wall, listening to my entire future crumble with each word that came out of her mouth. "Cancun is going to be absolutely amazing, though," she continued enthusiastically. "I've been checking out all the hidden beaches and that resort spa online. I've already booked multiple treatments for myself, massage, facial, the works." There was a pause in the conversation and I leaned closer to the wall separating us, straining to hear every word. "No, I haven't told Marcus that you're meeting me there yet," she said. "He thinks you're just sending me on that business trip to Orlando right after we get back from the honeymoon. He has no idea what's really happening." Another pause while the other person spoke. "Of course I've thought this through completely," Victoria said, sounding almost annoyed that someone would question her planning. "I'll tell Marcus that I need some space after the honeymoon, that I think I rushed into marriage and I'm having cold feet about the whole thing. Men are so simple and predictable. He'll blame himself for everything and won't even fight the divorce." I felt something fundamental shift inside me, like a critical support beam cracking under too much pressure. "Once the house closes, we'll have a shared asset that I can claim half of in the separation," she continued matter-of-factly. "Between that and clearing out all the joint accounts we've been building up, I should walk away with enough money to set us up very nicely while I transition to my new life." She laughed again, and the sound made my stomach turn. I know, it's just 9 more weeks of playing the doting fiancé," she said. "The sex has been so infrequent anyway that he barely notices when I'm not in the mood anymore." I backed away from the wall silently, grabbed my keys from where I had set them down, and left the apartment without making a sound. The Thai food sat forgotten on the kitchen counter, getting cold while my entire world fell apart. At that moment, all the hints I had been ignoring suddenly clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving. The mysterious work functions that I was never invited to join. The private phone calls that ended abruptly whenever I entered the room. The gradual loss of interest in physical intimacy between us. The random business trips with her boutique manager that never seemed to produce any actual business results or benefits for the store. Everything that had seemed like normal relationship challenges suddenly revealed themselves as calculated deception. I drove straight to Ryan's place without really thinking about where I was going. He had been my best friend since college and was supposed to be my best man in just 9 weeks. I found him in his garage working on his motorcycle, covered in grease and completely focused on whatever mechanical problem he was solving. "You look like someone just pissed in your coffee," he said when he saw my face as I walked into the garage. "I need a drink," was all I could manage to say in response. 3 drinks later, I told him absolutely everything. The phone call I had overheard, Victoria's detailed plan to clean out our joint accounts after the wedding, the fact that someone was flying to Cancun to meet her during what was supposed to be our honeymoon, and the house I had been planning to surprise her with, that would now become part of her divorce settlement. Ryan listened to the entire story without interrupting once, then said simply, "What's the move? You need to protect yourself financially, legally, all of it." Ryan was tactful enough not to pile on with "I told you so," even though his expression said everything that needed to be said. He had always thought Victoria was using me for my money and stability, and now we had definitive confirmation of his suspicions. "Stay here tonight," he offered without hesitation. "The spare room is yours, and we'll figure out a plan in the morning when your head is clearer." I took him up on his offer. When Victoria called around midnight wondering where I was, I sent back a text saying that I was helping Ryan with his motorcycle and would crash at his place for the night. She responded with a kissy face emoji, which made me want to throw my phone against the wall. The casual nature of her response, knowing what I now knew about her true feelings, was almost more infuriating than the original betrayal. The next morning, we sat at Ryan's kitchen table with notepads, laptops, and coffee, mapping out my escape plan like we were planning a military operation. Ryan is an IT guy who had gone through his own nasty breakup 3 years earlier when he caught his girlfriend running an active dating profile behind his back. So he approached my situation like he was debugging malicious code that had infected my life. "First priority is finances," he said, pulling up a spreadsheet on his laptop. "What's your current setup with bank accounts and assets?" I explained our financial structure in detail. I had my personal checking account where all my food truck income was deposited. Victoria had her personal account for her boutique salary, and we maintained a joint account that we used for bills and wedding expenses. "How much money is sitting in that joint account right now?" Ryan asked. "About $22,000, I replied. "Most of it is earmarked for final wedding payments and honeymoon spending money." Ryan nodded grimly and made notes. "And the house closing is scheduled for when exactly?" "June 1st, which is exactly 2 weeks before the wedding." "Is the mortgage application just in your name, or were you planning to add Victoria?" "Just my name on the mortgage, but I was planning to add her to the deed after we got married." "Do not do that under any circumstances," Ryan said firmly. "Keep it exactly as it is and act completely normal about everything. We need time to set up your protection correctly before you make any moves." Ryan pulled up a calendar application on his laptop and started working backwards from key dates. "Let's see. The wedding is June 15th. House closing is June 1st, and today is April 18th. That gives us just over 7 weeks to execute this plan without raising any red flags." "Bro," Ryan said, tapping his pen against the notepad rhythmically. "You realize you just dodged a financial nuclear bomb, right? Like, you were about to hand this woman the launch codes to your entire life's work." "Trust me, I'm painfully aware of that fact," I replied. We spent the next 4 hours meticulously outlining every shared expense and financial entanglement that Victoria and I had created together. The apartment lease that ran through January, furniture that we had mostly purchased together over the years, vacation reservations that were already booked and paid for, and wedding vendor contracts that had deposits attached. Next, we carefully documented all the assets that I had brought into the relationship before I even met Victoria. This included the food truck, my saved earnings from years of working multiple jobs, and my original house that I was now renting out to a tenant. Ryan approached the situation with the methodical precision of a software engineer debugging a complex system. We created a comprehensive strategy that covered every possible angle of my escape. I would need to secure new bank accounts at a completely different financial institution, document all assets that I had owned before the relationship began, and prepare to break our apartment lease. We also needed to figure out which wedding vendors might refund their deposits and which ones would keep our money regardless. This, Ryan said, pointing to our list of non-refundable wedding expenses, is what I like to call the jerk tax. Consider it the cost of not being financially gutted for the next decade of your life. He was absolutely right about that perspective. Some money would inevitably be lost in this process, but I could minimize the damage significantly if I played my cards correctly. It was a relatively small price to pay to escape what would have been a much larger financial trap. We created a detailed timeline that would allow me to methodically dismantle my shared life with Victoria without raising any suspicions. First, I would open new bank accounts and begin documenting all my assets. Then, I would secure important documents like my birth certificate, passport, and business papers, and begin the process of canceling wedding vendors. Next, I would find storage space and begin slowly moving my personal items out of our shared apartment. After that, I would secure alternative housing and notify our landlord about terminating the lease. The house closing would happen as scheduled, followed by final preparations for my complete disappearance. Finally, I would execute the actual move during Victoria's bachelorette weekend, when she would be out of town and unable to interfere. That night, I went home and acted like absolutely nothing had changed. I found Victoria on the couch scrolling through honeymoon activities on her iPad, researching all the things we would supposedly be doing together in Cancun. "Babe, what do you think about booking a private sunset cruise?" she asked without looking up from her screen. "Whatever you want," I replied as neutrally as possible, then went to take a long, hot shower. Standing under the steaming water, I thought about how easily the lies had been flowing from Victoria's mouth for who knows how long. How convincingly she could look me directly in the eye while planning my complete financial destruction behind my back. It was both impressive and absolutely terrifying to realize how skilled she was at deception. Over dinner that evening, pasta that she had ordered from a restaurant since Victoria rarely cooked anything herself, she chatted casually about wedding details and workplace drama as if nothing had happened. At one point during the meal, she brought up the house hunting that we had been doing together over the past few months. "I really like that place we looked at in Pinecrest Manor," she said, referring to a neighborhood that was way above our actual budget. "I know you thought it was too expensive when we first saw it, but maybe we could revisit that option. I'd be willing to pick up extra shifts at the boutique to help with the mortgage payments." The calculated performance was absolutely remarkable to witness. She had never once offered to contribute to our housing costs during our entire relationship, but now, with the wedding approaching, she was laying groundwork to appear like an equal financial partner. She was positioning herself to look like someone who had contributed to our major purchases when the divorce proceedings began. "We can talk about it after the wedding," I answered as non-committally as possible. "Right now, I'm just focused on getting through all these final vendor payments and making sure everything is set for June." "You're so practical and responsible," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's exactly why we're so good together as a couple. I dream big and think creatively, and you figure out how to make it all happen financially." That night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling and mentally inventorying everything in our shared apartment to determine what I actually cared about keeping. The list was surprisingly short. Most of the expensive items had been her choices anyway, and I realized I could walk away from almost everything without feeling any real loss. Over the next 2 weeks, I methodically dismantled the life I had been building with Victoria while maintaining the perfect facade that everything was completely normal between us. Each day became a carefully calculated series of moves designed to protect my assets and prepare for my escape. I felt like I was living a double life, playing the role of the devoted fiancé while secretly planning my financial survival. I opened new bank accounts at a completely different financial institution and began transferring most of my personal savings out of accounts that Victoria had any knowledge of. I also redirected my upcoming food truck deposits to flow into these new accounts instead of the ones we had been using. During Victoria's weekly yoga class, I retrieved all my important documents from our apartment, things like my birth certificate, passport, social security card, and business incorporation papers, and secured them in a safe deposit box at the new bank. I called our landlord directly and negotiated paying the 3-month penalty fee to break our lease effective July 1st, which would give Victoria enough time to find alternative housing after I disappeared. I scheduled professional movers for June 1st the same day as my house closing, and arranged for furniture delivery to the new house. I also began the tedious process of quietly canceling wedding vendor agreements one by one, collecting whatever refunds were possible, and documenting the losses I would have to absorb. During this period, I moved my personal belongings to my parents' garage in small phases, explaining to Victoria that they were wedding gifts that needed temporary storage until we had a bigger place. Some wedding vendors were surprisingly sympathetic when I explained the situation honestly, and I managed to recover more money than I had initially expected. However, the venue kept most of our deposit, which was expected since they had already turned down other bookings for our date. At home, I continued to be the same old Marcus that Victoria was accustomed to, occasionally distracted by work stress but generally supportive of all her wedding decisions. I agreed to hire the overpriced wedding planner she had found, confirmed my tuxedo fitting appointment, and nodded along enthusiastically to her discussions about signature cocktails for the reception. "Do you think your cousin Jim might be seated too close to the bar?" Victoria asked one evening while reviewing our seating chart. "I'm worried he'll drink too much and make a scene during the speeches." "I'm sure it'll be fine," I replied, knowing that none of these concerns would ever actually matter. The mental separation was already complete in my mind. When I looked at Victoria now, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just cold recognition that I was dealing with someone who was fundamentally dishonest at her core. It was almost fascinating in a clinical way, watching her perform the role of the devoted fiancé while I knew exactly what she really thought about me and our relationship. The closing on the new house went smoothly without any complications. I got the keys on a Friday afternoon and drove straight there to walk through the empty rooms alone. I tried to imagine the life I had originally planned versus the life I was now facing. And surprisingly, the difference didn't feel as devastating as I had expected it to. If anything, I felt a sense of relief and freedom that I hadn't anticipated. That weekend was Victoria's bachelorette party in Las Vegas, which she had been planning for months with her bridesmaids. The moment her Uber pulled away from our apartment building, I sprang into action like I was executing a military operation. The professional movers arrived exactly 40 minutes later, and within 5 hours, everything I cared about was loaded into their truck and headed for the new house. I had spent the preceding weeks carefully sorting through our shared possessions, creating detailed lists of what belonged to me before the relationship, what we had purchased together, and what I was willing to abandon to avoid any potential complications. In the end, I took my clothes, personal items, family heirlooms, and a few pieces of furniture that I had owned before meeting Victoria. I left behind the expensive sectional sofa that she had insisted we buy, the dining room table we had spent way too much money on, and most of the kitchen appliances and gadgets. What remained in the apartment were easily replaceable items and things that we had purchased together that I was genuinely happy to leave behind. I had no emotional attachment to any of it, and I knew that taking only what was clearly mine would make any future legal disputes much simpler to resolve. Before I left the apartment for the final time, I wrote a brief note to Victoria. I drew a middle finger on a piece of paper and wrote beneath it, "Weddings canceled. I heard your call." I left the note on the kitchen counter right next to her engagement ring, which I had carefully removed from her jewelry box. Then I drove to my new house, where Ryan was already waiting for me with a case of beer and a PlayStation that he had brought over to help me settle in. We ordered pizza, set up camping chairs in my completely empty living room, and played Call of Duty until 3 a.m. "Two dodging bullets?" Ryan said, raising his beer bottle in a toast. "Not just dodging, watching it fly by in slow motion," I replied, clinking my bottle against his. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply and peacefully, despite the fact that I was lying on an air mattress with a sleeping bag in a completely empty house. There was something profoundly liberating about having complete control over my environment again. My phone started absolutely blowing up on Sunday evening, when Victoria must have returned early from Las Vegas. In the span of just 40 minutes, there were 28 missed calls and 41 text messages that ranged from confused. "What's that note supposed to mean? What call are you talking about?" To angry. "You can't just leave over some kind of misunderstanding," to increasingly desperate. "Please call me back. We can work this out. I love you." I didn't respond to any of the messages. Instead, I blocked her phone number entirely, poured myself another beer, and continued my gaming marathon with Ryan. My new furniture wouldn't be delivered until Thursday, but the emptiness of the house felt completely appropriate for this moment in my life. It represented a clean slate and a fresh beginning. The next morning, I called my parents and my sister Diana to explain what had happened before they heard about it through family gossip or social media. My dad was characteristically quiet but supportive, asking practical questions about my finances and housing situation. My mom was actually relieved when I told her the whole story. It turned out that she had harbored serious reservations about Victoria throughout our entire relationship, but hadn't wanted to interfere with my decisions. Diana, on the other hand, practically cackled with vindication when I explained the situation to her. "I knew it," she said triumphantly. "Did I not tell you exactly this would happen? Did I not say that woman was after your money from day one?" "Yes, you're very smart and perceptive. We're all impressed with your intuition," I replied dryly. "No, but seriously, Marcus, are you okay emotionally? This has to be devastating." "The house is nice, the business is doing well," I said. "I just lost $21,000 on an engagement ring and about $35,000 more on wedding deposits that I can't recover." "That's way better than losing half your food truck business in a messy divorce," Diana pointed out pragmatically. "Consider it expensive tuition for the university of not getting completely played by manipulative women again." Monday morning, I went to work at the food truck as usual and had to field some awkward questions from my staff, who had seen Victoria's increasingly frantic and dramatic social media posts over the weekend. I kept my explanations simple and professional. "The wedding is off, and I'd rather not discuss the details." My head cook pulled me aside during the lunch prep period, looking uncomfortable about something he needed to tell me. "Victoria's outside in the parking area," he said quietly. "She's been there for about 20 minutes. Do you want me to tell her you're not here today?" "I absolutely do not want to see her," I replied firmly. "Please handle it however you think is best." Victoria showed up at my food truck 4 more times that week, and each time my staff ran interference for me without me even having to ask. One of my workers, a college student who had always openly disliked Victoria's entitled attitude, took particular pleasure in telling her that I was in an important business meeting or at the bank handling financial matters. Meanwhile, I was gradually settling into my new house, room by room. I set up the bedroom first, then focused on getting the kitchen functional, and finally bought a decent couch and television for the living room. I started making preliminary plans for renovating the master bathroom with higher-end fixtures and custom tile work. It was strange how quickly the place began to feel like a real home instead of just an empty house. By Thursday, word of our breakup had spread throughout our mutual social circle. Victoria's parents called my parents demanding explanations. Her friends were messaging my friends trying to get information. Our shared social circle predictably fractured along lines of loyalty and friendship. People wanted all the juicy details, and rumors began circulating about what had really happened between us. Someone started spreading a rumor that I had been cheating on Victoria, which she did absolutely nothing to correct or deny. I maintained complete radio silence, refusing to engage in any of the drama or defend myself against false accusations. I figured that anyone who knew me well enough would understand that the rumors didn't match my character, and anyone who didn't know me that well wasn't worth worrying about. Victoria's parents weren't taking the situation well at all. Her father left an angry voicemail on my phone, demanding that I be a man and fix whatever misunderstanding had occurred between Victoria and me. Her mother was even worse, sending me a lengthy text message saying that I should be ashamed of myself for humiliating their daughter in such a public way. She also demanded that I reimburse them for their $12,000 contribution to the wedding, as if I was somehow responsible for their financial loss. Victoria's sister Madison, who was possibly even more entitled and demanding than Victoria herself, showed up at my food truck during the busy lunch rush one day. She caused a dramatic scene that ended with her being physically escorted out of the area by my head cook, who had absolutely no patience for that kind of disruption to our business operations. The harassment from Victoria's family escalated when her father decided to park outside my new house one evening, honking his car horn periodically for nearly an hour. I carefully documented everything, taking photos, recording timestamps, and saving screenshots of all the text messages and voicemails. Then I had my brother Tim, who works as a contract lawyer in Tampa, draft a strongly worded legal letter threatening a restraining order if Victoria's family didn't immediately stop all contact attempts. The letter included detailed timestamps, specific locations of harassment incidents, and screenshots of all their contact attempts over the previous weeks. It was professional but firm, making it clear that any further harassment would result in immediate legal action. The threatening behavior stopped completely after they received Tim's letter. Meanwhile, my own family rallied around me in ways that reminded me why blood relationships matter so much. My dad helped me set up security cameras around the perimeter of my new house, just in case Victoria or her family decided to escalate their behavior. My mom started bringing over home-cooked meals whenever I was working late at the food truck and didn't have time to cook for myself. Diana stopped by regularly to help me unpack boxes and organize my new space, while providing her typically colorful running commentary about how she had always known that Victoria was completely fake. "You know what, Diana?" I said one evening as we assembled a bookshelf in my living room. "I'm actually really proud of how you handled this whole situation." "What do you mean?" she asked, looking up from the instruction manual. Most guys would have confronted Victoria directly, made a big emotional scene, and given her a chance to manipulate the situation with crocodile tears and fake apologies. You just executed your plan cold and clean, like a professional. "Thanks. I learned that approach from watching you handle that cheating ex-boyfriend situation last year," she replied. "The difference is that I only lost 8 months of my life and an expensive espresso machine. You dodged a lifetime of financial bloodletting." She wasn't wrong about that assessment. If I had actually gone through with the wedding and allowed Victoria to be added to the house deed as planned, then discovered her scheme during our honeymoon, or after we returned, I would have been legally obligated to split significant assets with her during divorce proceedings. The food truck business might have been protected since it clearly predated our relationship. But the house, all joint bank accounts, and anything purchased during our marriage would have been considered fair game for division. I still hadn't directly communicated with Victoria at all, which was clearly driving her absolutely insane with frustration. She continued showing up at my food truck, sent multiple emails to my business account, and even tried to reach me through LinkedIn messages like we were professional colleagues. Thursday night, she finally managed to ambush me in the parking lot after I closed the truck for the evening. I had been staying late specifically to avoid exactly this type of confrontation, but she must have been waiting for hours in her car, watching for me to come out. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded, blocking my path to my car. "You completely misinterpreted a private conversation and blew everything out of proportion." I said nothing in response, just tried to step around her and continue to my vehicle. "This is so typical of you, Marcus, always overthinking everything and making mountains out of molehills," she continued. "It was just a venting session with my girlfriend about having cold feet before the wedding. You're throwing away 3 years of our relationship over absolutely nothing." "Move out of my way, Victoria," I said calmly. "No, I'm not moving until you act like a grown man and actually talk to me about this situation. I heard everything during that phone call, the divorce plan, the scheme to clean out our accounts, all of it." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "What about our apartment lease? Our lease runs until January, and you can't just make unilateral decisions about our shared responsibilities." Of course, that's what she chose to focus on, not the emotional betrayal or the destruction of trust, but the practical financial implications of our breakup. "I already paid the penalty fee to break the lease," I told her. "You have until July 1st to find a new place to live." "You what? You don't get to make unilateral decisions about our shared financial obligations like that." "We're not married, Victoria. I can do whatever I want with my own money. Speaking of which, I've already transferred all my funds out of our joint accounts. The wedding is completely canceled. All vendors have been notified and it's done." Victoria suddenly switched tactics and started with the waterworks, tears flowing down her cheeks as she tried a completely different approach. "Marcus, please, I made a terrible mistake," she said through her sobs. "I was scared about the wedding and feeling trapped by all the pressure. People say stupid, horrible things when they're scared and not thinking clearly. I almost had to admire the performance she was putting on. If I hadn't personally heard her laughing with genuine amusement about defrauding me and planning my financial destruction, I might have actually believed this act of remorse." "People don't accidentally formulate detailed plans to clean out someone's bank accounts," I replied flatly. "They don't accidentally arrange for their lover to meet them during their honeymoon." Her demeanor changed instantly when she realized the emotional manipulation wasn't working. The tears dried up remarkably quickly, and her voice took on a threatening tone. "You're going to regret this decision," she said coldly. "People already think you cheated on me, and I could make things very difficult for your business if I wanted to." "Go ahead and try it," I responded calmly. "I've got recordings of everything, including that original phone call where you laid out your entire scheme." Her face went completely pale when I mentioned the recordings. "You were spying on me? That's illegal. I came home early from work and accidentally overheard you on the balcony," I explained. "Everything after that was just me protecting myself from someone who was planning to destroy my life." As I drove away from that confrontation, I could see Victoria in my rearview mirror. Her face was twisted into the particular expression of someone who had always gotten her way through manipulation, and suddenly found herself in a situation where her usual tactics were completely powerless. Meanwhile, I was continuing to settle into my new house and establish routines that didn't involve Victoria in any way. Her absence from my daily life became normal surprisingly quickly. I hired a professional landscaping service to tackle the seriously overgrown backyard, and I started making detailed plans for renovating the master bathroom. I wanted to install a jacuzzi tub, double vanity, and heated floor tiles, all things that Victoria would have absolutely loved, but that I was now planning to do entirely for my own enjoyment. Friday night, Ryan came over with wings from that sports bar we used to frequent during football season, back when our lives were simpler and less complicated. "So, about that honeymoon," he started casually while we ate. "What about it?" I asked. "Well, you already paid for the hotel room in full, and your first-class airplane seat is completely non-refundable." I nodded, not immediately seeing where he was going with this line of thinking. "Well, I happen to have some vacation days saved up at work," he continued. "And I've got about $900 in travel reward points that I've been saving for something special." "Are you suggesting that we go to Cancun together?" I asked, finally understanding his proposal. "I'm suggesting that we take advantage of what's already been paid for," he said with a grin. "I can book a separate plane ticket using my travel points, and we can enjoy the hell out of an overpriced resort with an open bar and unlimited room service." At first, the idea seemed completely ridiculous and inappropriate, but the more I thought about it, the more perfect it became. It would be the ultimate middle finger to Victoria's carefully laid plans, and it would ensure that at least someone got some enjoyment out of all the money I had spent. "Hell yeah," I said, raising my beer bottle. "Let's do it." The next morning, I helped Ryan book his airline ticket using his accumulated travel points, plus some cash to cover the price difference. The hotel room reservation remained in my name, and everything else about the trip stayed exactly as Victoria and I had originally planned it. Our flight was still scheduled for what would have been 4 days after my canceled wedding date. Victoria found out about our travel plans, of course. One of her bridesmaids worked for a travel agency and noticed that the hotel reservation was still active in the system, but the connecting flights had been changed to include Ryan instead of Victoria. This discovery sparked a completely new barrage of attempts to contact me, this time with a much nastier and more vindictive edge to the messages. "You're taking your friend on our honeymoon?" Read one text from an unknown phone number since I had blocked her main number. "What kind of pathetic loser does something like that?" Another message from yet another unknown number said, "You can't do this to me. This is sick and twisted." I blocked each new number as soon as the messages came in and continued with my plans exactly as I had outlined them. I also took care of the remaining wedding-related tasks that needed to be handled. I canceled the tuxedo rentals for myself and all the groomsmen, and I sent final notifications to the venue and remaining vendors confirming that the wedding was permanently canceled. Some of the wedding deposits were refundable since I was canceling with sufficient advance notice, but most of them weren't recoverable at all. The financial damage from the entire situation was substantial, but completely manageable in the long run. Between non-refundable deposits, the engagement ring that I would never see again, and the penalty for breaking our apartment lease early, I had lost approximately $58,000. However, when I compared that loss to what a messy divorce would have cost me down the road, it felt like pocket change. I started meeting with my accountant on a weekly basis to completely reorganize my financial situation and plan for the future. The food truck profits were actually up 18% compared to the same period last year, and without Victoria's expensive lifestyle to subsidize, I could reinvest significantly more money back into growing the business. I began seriously exploring the possibility of adding a catering division to my operations, which could substantially boost revenue without requiring me to invest in a second physical location. The remaining wedding invitations sat in a cardboard box in my garage, serving as an expensive reminder of the bullet I had dodged. I had canceled the printing order, but the first batch of 60 invitations had already been completed and delivered before I could stop production. They were elegant cream-colored cards with gold foil stamping and letterpress details that had cost $14 per invitation. I kept them as a tangible reminder of how close I had come to financial disaster. During the final countdown to what would have been our wedding date, Victoria's attempts to contact me grew increasingly desperate and unhinged. She sent a carefully crafted email that apologized for anything that might have hurt me, without actually acknowledging what she had done wrong. It was a classic non-apology apology that tried to frame the entire situation as some kind of misunderstanding. She attempted to make it seem like she sometimes says things she doesn't really mean when she's stressed about major life events like weddings. Her bridesmaids launched a coordinated campaign to try to reason with me on her behalf. 5 different women that I barely knew sent me long, emotional text messages about how I was throwing away something special and how Victoria was completely devastated by my decision. Not a single one of them mentioned the actual reason I had ended the relationship, which told me that Victoria had clearly crafted a narrative where she was the innocent victim of my irrational and unpredictable behavior. The scheduled wedding day came and went without any fanfare from my perspective. I spent it working at the food truck, running a special menu that completely sold out by 8 p.m. that night. I sat on my new deck with a sparkling water, scrolling through house renovation ideas on my tablet and planning improvements to my property. I didn't feel sadness, anger, or regret, just profound relief that I had escaped a trap that could have destroyed my financial future. The Cancun trip was exactly what I needed at that moment in my life. It provided the perfect combination of relaxation, distance from the drama I had left behind, and the opportunity to enjoy something positive after months of stress. Ryan and I spent our days hiking, snorkeling, and hitting every happy hour within a 6-mile radius of the resort. We posted just enough vacation photos to social media to ensure maximum irritation for anyone back home who might be paying attention to our activities. "Do you think she's seeing these posts?" Ryan asked, as we sat at the pool bar during our 4th round of margaritas, watching the sunset over the ocean. "Absolutely guaranteed," I replied, checking my phone. "I've gotten 14 blocked calls from different phone numbers since we posted that sunset picture an hour ago." The resort was everything that Victoria had described during her research phase. It featured infinity pools overlooking the ocean, premium service from attentive staff, and luxury amenities that justified the expensive price tag. While I would normally consider this type of vacation an extravagant waste of money, I allowed myself to enjoy every minute of it. This trip wasn't just leisure. It was a declaration of financial independence from a relationship that had been slowly bleeding me dry for years. While relaxing by the pool one afternoon, I struck up a conversation with a retired investment banker who had brought his adult children on a family vacation. He mentioned casually that he was looking to invest in local businesses with strong growth potential, particularly in the food service industry. "What kind of returns does a food truck business typically generate?" he asked with genuine interest. 2 hours later, we had exchanged contact information and made plans to meet when we both returned home to discuss potential investment opportunities. Sometimes the best opportunities find you when you're not desperately trying to impress someone else or manage a crisis in your personal life. I returned from Cancun to find that my new life was really taking shape in positive ways. The food truck was experiencing increased business thanks to a new supplier deal that had improved our profit margins. The house was coming together beautifully, room by room, and I had even started playing tennis again on Friday nights, something I had given up during the intense wedding planning period. My head cook had implemented a rotating specials menu that was bringing in customers during traditionally slow weeknight hours, and my landlord had offered to discuss a 12-year lease renewal with very favorable terms. Even my credit score was beginning to recover from the wedding finance fiasco. Months passed, and the Victoria chapter of my life began to feel like distant history, something that had happened to a completely different version of myself. I made the conscious decision to delete most of my social media accounts, keeping only what was absolutely necessary for promoting the food truck business. This meant I had no idea what was happening in Victoria's life, and frankly, I didn't care enough to find out. Then one night, I ran into Tyler, one of the few mutual friends who had managed to stay neutral during our dramatic breakup. We happened to be at the same sports bar, both there to catch a game, and he slid into the seat next to me during halftime. "Have you heard anything about Victoria lately?" he asked cautiously, clearly testing the waters to see if I was interested in updates. "Not a single thing, and I don't want to," I replied honestly. "Fair enough," Tyler said. "It's just that, man, it's turned into a complete shit show for her." Despite my best efforts to remain completely indifferent, I found myself curious about what had happened. "What do you mean?" "Well, that guy Brandon, the one she was planning to meet in Cancun," Tyler began. "Apparently he dumped her about 3 months ago, just completely ghosted her after she moved in with him." I took a long sip of my water, feeling absolutely nothing except a detached sort of interest, like hearing about a character in a television show that I no longer watched. "She's now 4 months behind on her rent and about to get evicted from her apartment," Tyler continued. "She had to sell her car just to make ends meet. Her parents completely cut her off financially when they found out what she had been planning to do to you. I realized that I felt no satisfaction, no sense of vindication, and no schadenfreude whatsoever. It was complete emotional detachment. It turns out that boutique job wasn't nearly as profitable as she made it sound," Tyler added. She had been supplementing her income with monthly payments from her parents the entire time. When they cut her off, she couldn't maintain her lifestyle at all. "That's rough," I said finally, my attention already drifting back to the game on the television above the bar. "Anyway, did you catch that trade the Heat made yesterday?" I asked, successfully changing the subject to something I actually cared about. As we debated NBA roster moves and playoff predictions, I realized something important about my own emotional growth. The best revenge isn't just living well. It's living so well that when you hear your ex-partner is circling the drain, your only reaction is mild curiosity followed by complete indifference. Tyler wasn't quite finished with the Victoria updates, though. "She got fired from the boutique, too," he said during a commercial break. "Oh, really?" I responded without much interest. "Apparently, she was skimming money from the cash register," Tyler explained. "Not enough to be worth filing criminal charges, but definitely enough to get her terminated immediately." I nodded, only half listening to what he was saying. On the television screen above the bar, the quarterback had just thrown a terrible interception that would probably cost his team the game. "Bad decision," I muttered, my eyes focused on the replay. "Yeah, she always did think she was smarter than everyone else," Tyler said, completely misinterpreting my comment about the football play. "No, I meant the quarterback," I clarified with a laugh. "He should have seen that safety coming from a mile away." Tyler laughed too. "Man, you really are completely over her, aren't you?" I realized that he was absolutely right. I genuinely didn't care about Victoria's downward spiral at all. It wasn't satisfaction or a sense of justice being served. It was complete emotional detachment from someone who no longer had any relevance to my life. 7 months after what would have been my wedding day, my meeting with the investment banker from Cancun finally resulted in something concrete. He offered to invest $170,000 in my food truck business in exchange for a 22% stake, with the funds specifically earmarked for opening a second location. After careful consideration and thorough review with my lawyer, I decided to accept his offer. The planning for the new location began immediately. I found a promising space in a developing part of town that had lower rent but growing foot traffic from new businesses and residential developments. I signed a 6-year lease with an option to purchase the building after year 4. I started designing a kitchen layout that would improve on all the operational inefficiencies I had learned about from running my first truck. I hired a talented young chef who had been working under a James Beard Award winner at a high-end restaurant downtown. She brought fresh culinary ideas and an established Instagram following that helped generate buzz and excitement before we even opened our doors. This time, I was building something much bigger than myself, a true business enterprise, not just a passion project that paid the bills. The house renovations continued progressing as well. I finished the master bathroom renovation with high-end fixtures and custom tile work that exceeded my original vision. I updated the kitchen with commercial-grade appliances that I got at an industry discount through my restaurant supply connections. I built a spacious deck that was perfect for hosting summer barbecues and started having weekly dinner parties for friends and family members. One Saturday evening, about 11 months after the Victoria incident, I was hosting a small gathering at my house. Ryan was there with his new girlfriend Diana, and her husband had brought their kids, and Tyler came with his wife and a friend they wanted me to meet. Her name was Sophia, and she was a pediatric physical therapist who had just moved to town to start her own practice. As I was grilling steaks on my new deck and keeping a careful eye on the corn. Timing is everything when you're cooking for a group. Sophia came over to offer her help with the food preparation. "Diana tells me you own a food truck," she said, expertly turning the corn without even being asked. "That's pretty impressive for someone our age to build a successful business from scratch." "Thanks, it's definitely been quite a journey," I replied, appreciating that she had jumped in to help without making a big production about it. "I bet it has been. I just opened my own physical therapy practice," she continued, "and the administrative side of running a business is absolutely kicking my butt. Do you have any advice for a fellow entrepreneur?" We ended up talking about business operations throughout the entire dinner. Sophia wanted to know about organizational systems, operational efficiency, and work-life balance strategies. She asked intelligent questions about profit margins, growth planning, and scaling a service-based business. What struck me most was that she never once mentioned how my business achievements might benefit her personally or financially. Her interest seemed genuinely focused on learning and improving her own professional situation. After everyone had left for the evening, I sat on my deck reflecting on the stark contrast between Sophia's authentic interest in business and entrepreneurship versus Victoria's calculated performances and manipulative questions. The difference was so obvious that it was almost jarring to remember how I had once fallen for Victoria's act. Sophia and I started dating shortly after that dinner party. Unlike my previous relationship, this one was refreshingly straightforward and honest from the very beginning. We split restaurant checks without any discussion or awkwardness. She valued experiences and meaningful activities over expensive outings. And there were no games, manipulation tactics, or hidden agendas. It was just authentic human connection based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility. As I look back on this entire experience now, I realize that sometimes the worst moments of your life actually become the turning points that lead you towards something much better. Sometimes a canceled wedding is actually a prison break that you didn't even know you needed. And sometimes, just sometimes, the bullet that you managed to dodge turns around and ends up hitting the person who originally fired it at you. The investment in my second food truck location has been incredibly successful, and I'm already planning a third location for next year. My relationship with Sophia continues to grow stronger, built on a foundation of honesty, mutual support, and shared values. My house has become a real home where I regularly host friends and family, and I've developed hobbies and interests that I had completely neglected during my relationship with Victoria. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts and the people who care about me. My sister Diana's warnings, Ryan's concerns, and even my parents' subtle reservations about Victoria were all accurate. I should have listened to them much earlier, but I'm grateful that I at least had the presence of mind to act decisively when I finally discovered the truth. If there's one lesson I want to share from this experience, it's this. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Don't make excuses for red flags, don't rationalize away concerning behavior, and don't ignore the advice of people who know you well and have your best interests at heart. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from someone who doesn't truly value you, even when it's difficult and expensive to do so. The $21,000 engagement ring and the wedding deposits were expensive, but they were a small price to pay for my freedom and my future. Today, I'm building a life with someone who genuinely loves and respects me. My business is thriving, and I wake up every morning grateful that I had the courage to choose myself when it mattered most.